Joining us today on the Everyman podcast is, without a doubt, one of our favorite guests. First episode on episode 38, episode 86. Now he's here joining us on episode 140. He is a man of many hats, a man of many expertise. Scuba diver, pilot, scientist, photographer, adventurer, explorer, ladies man, all around everyman, prospective astronaut Dylan Dickstein. Dylan, how are you, my brother?
Great, thanks. No, it's awesome to see you guys again. It's been a year, and this is round 3.
That's right.
Yeah, baby.
It's the unprecedented. It would be fitting that soon you will be Triple D. On the precipice of your PhD. Wow, I got to stop the rhyme there, otherwise I won't be able to stop. It's fitting that we're here for the third time, and we were chatting a little bit before we got started here. So last time we had you on, you were telling us about your trip to Antarctica. If you're listening to this show for the first time and this is the first time you're hearing a Dylan Dickstein, pause, go back, check out the old episodes, come back to this one. Get caught up. What have you been up to in the last year since we last saw you, my man?
Yeah, it's been another exciting year. It hasn't been as cold as Antarctica, but in spite of the pandemic, I still have been able to do some form of exploring. I actually, back in April this year, did something called the Mars Desert Research Station. And this is an astronaut analog that goes for about 2 weeks, where you're living in isolation with a team of like individuals in the middle of Hanksville, Utah. So you're isolated from civilization, and you live in a 2-story dome that essentially encompasses your life, and it's supposed to simulate what it's like to live on Mars.
Jeez.
Now, I encourage everybody as they're listening to this, if you're listening to the audio-only version, head over to Dylan Dickstein's Instagram, which will be in the show notes. You can swipe up there on your app and take a look at some of these pictures. Now, from a scale of like space camp to being on Mars, like how one-to-one of a recreation or like rigid rule set did you have for this, and how long did it take to get prepared for it?
Yeah, the Mars Desert Research Station is only one of 3 astronaut analogs of its type. Essentially, there's the Mars Desert Research Station, which is just outside of Hanksville, Utah. There's High Seas, which is actually on the Big Island of Hawaii, and that's a lunar analog. And then there's ironically something called Lunaris, which is a Martian analog, and that's in Poland. And so the 3 of these stations are supposed to have people like myself who are training to try to better themselves as astronaut candidates, and give them an opportunity to test out their skills and to learn. And it was a great opportunity. You apply 2 years in advance for the Mars Desert Research Station, so it's a very long process. I gathered a team together. You apply as a team of 6 typically. And so I gathered a team together from past internships, whether it be SpaceX or Virgin Galactic or other places I've been fortunate enough to work, as well as my undergraduate institution, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and finally my graduate school, UCLA. And then finally I was able to get together a team of 5 other individuals who I thought would work together well and were astronaut-like. The qualification that I was looking for at minimum was someone that I thought could be highly qualified for the astronaut selection. So someone like this. And I was fortunate to be able to pull from peers and past colleagues who are all kind of in this area, and we ended up having a very talented team.
I was watching the video that you made, and it looked like you guys were excited to be doing it, and it was like, I'm sure it was stressful, but it seemed like something you really wanted to do. So, and I gotta ask, like, if that was a 2-year wait, how much longer is the Hawaii one? Is that like a 5-year wait to get into the Hawaii?
They all have their own styles. And Mars as a research station is arguably the probably the longest wait actually. Hawaii is more like half a year to a year, and Lunares is sort of on that order as well. Mars as a research station, which is supported by the Mars Society, has the longest lead time, and I think they may even have the most applicants, and some of that kind of draws from the cost. Like we funded our own way for this. We did have sponsors who were able to donate and help us get there, but participants typically will spend their own money to do these things, and MDRS is the more affordable option for people who live in the United States.
Now, what is the Mars Society? You mentioned that.
Yeah, the Mars Society is
Let's be honest. That sounds like some sort of, space federation.
It's a group of individuals led by Dr. Robert Zubrin, who wrote the book on how to get to Mars. Essentially, and he was a mentor to us. Anyone who gets to participate in MDRS has the opportunity. Whether it happens or not, it depends. But we at least had luck in being able to chat with Dr. Robert Zubrin before we went. And he leads this organization, which has thousands of members and various conferences around the world. And it tries to take the most scientific and peer-reviewed path to helping understand what's the best way for us to get to Mars and then sustainably live there.
So it's like a think tank for Mars, kind of.
Yeah.
Deal. Cool.
I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Now, go ahead, Daryl.
I gotta ask the question. What were the days like at MDRS, man? I want to know what the day was like for our man Triple D.
Yeah, it's a far cry from a vacation. It's certainly not this Martian sort of fictitious world. You are the moment the simulation begins, an astronaut on Mars, and you have a job to do. And so I was the commander on this mission. So I led a team of 6, and we had a health and safety officer, we had a scientist, we had a crew engineer who was tasked with fixing various things when they broke, and me as commander was making sure that logistically we were staying productive, that any sort of social issues were being resolved very quickly and before they started. So there definitely was an element of making sure everyone works as a team, and making sure we achieve our objectives to the best of our abilities. Now we woke up; these were full days. We would wake up at 7 a.m. almost every day for those 2-week period, and have breakfast as a team quickly to make sure everyone is to check in with each other, and then by about 9 a.m. 10 a.m. we are suiting up half the crew to go on an extravehicular activity, or an EVA, where you are about to go onto the Martian landscape and set out to do some sort of navigation, or look for emergency shelters in case there was some sort of like a windstorm on Mars, and as well as doing some soil sampling. So we would get that team ready, all suited up in simulated astronaut suits. They would go out for about 4 hours, and so I myself got to go on an EVA every other day, and essentially you're on Mars for that period of time, and you come back and we can have dinner as a team, and then edit photos, be able to journal about what we gathered that day, what we learned that day, things we want to do better the next day, and then communicate back with the director of the Mars Society, as well as the director of the actual research station itself, as though you are talking to some sort of station that's located on Mars and you are some waypoint near it.
Are there any like extracurricular activities? So you guys, like, outside of just a normal, full day of work that you have? Like health and wellness, I'm assuming is pretty huge when it comes to being in isolation like that.
Definitely. We made sure to have our truly like our meal times were really important. Like sitting down as a team and cooking together. So we were given freeze-dried foods as well as dried foods. Everything is Martian-like, what you'd expect to bring with you to Mars. And so we had to rehydrate all of our vegetables. We had to rehydrate all of our meats. And and it was very delicious, actually, once prepared properly. And we made some really awesome meals. We were fortunate that at least a few people on the team were pretty skilled in the kitchen. And so we had one of our individuals on the team, a good buddy of mine from years ago, who was there, named Julio Hernandez, and he was a fantastic cook. He made a flan from scratch on Mars. Pretty incredible.
When you say rehydration of like your vegetables and meats, like what's that process like? Does it take a while or like?
It's 20 minutes or so in lukewarm water, and you got this dried celery back to a fluffy celery.
What? That's nice.
It was pretty cool.
I'm into, cooking gadgets, and I'm like looking at these food dehydrators now. I'm like, well, I can make my own beef jerky. Now I'm like, I'm even more interested. It sounds like a good time.
It is interesting, like when these foods were in their dehydrated forms, the last thing you want to think about is eating it. They don't look good at all, and oftentimes they don't smell very good either. But it's amazing the transformation they go through once you add water. It's delicious. It was absolutely delicious. And but yeah, the beef before it was rehydrated is as if it looked like dog food.
Oh man.
Wow. Well, you got to think that's one of the things you want to invest early in on is, as far as space exploration is like, look, if we're going to want people to like recreate a civilization on another planet, we're going to need like food that's people want to actually eat. So it doesn't surprise me that that's, high on the priority list.
Sweet.
Now, sweet. How did that compare to your experience in Antarctica in that kind of isolation? Was it different because mentally you didn't have to, go on a boat and like a King Kong Skull Island-esque journey to get there?
The biggest difference was the role. On this mission for Mars as a research station, I was the commander. I was in charge of the team and their safety and making sure everyone was productive, and the larger objectives were being worked toward. For Antarctica, I was definitely a participant. The team was led by people who were much more biologic focused, as opposed to me, primarily an engineer. And so from that standpoint, it definitely felt like a different sort of opportunity. Here, I was making sure that everyone works as a team, whereas in Antarctica, I was trying to make sure that I got along with my other teammates.
That makes sense.
Did you feel like because I mean, my position when I played at Notre Dame, I was a captain of our football team, one of three. But like you being the commander, like you're directly, at least I don't want to put words in your mouth here, Dylan, but I would kind of think and look at you as somebody who's responsible for your teammates' survival. So like, did you take that to heart? Like, was that part of like, like your whole mental makeup when you were at MDRS?
Yeah, you have to, because there's no question about it. You're on Mars for those 2 weeks, and any misstep could be deadly. And of course, in actuality, you're in Utah, and it's a balmy 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're on, there's gravity, there's air, but you have to fully consciously think that you don't have any of those things. And so if you were to forget to lock the helmet on your spacesuit, that could kill you. You have to remember that if you forget a walkie-talkie and now you have lost your communications with someone, that could endanger you. These kinds of things. And so we took so many precautions and planned for as many sort of contingencies as we could in case there were these issues. So for instance, I had the team memorize about 15 different hand signals in case we lost communications. And sure enough, on day 2, we went into an extravehicular activity, and the goal was to find a couple of emergency shelters, and it was roughly a mile from our habitat. And at some point, I could see my other 2 astronaut analog participants with me. But at one point, I was surprised I wasn't hearing any of them anymore. Sure enough, I had lost my comms. And you of course, you check your comms and realize I'm out. I can't communicate. And then thank goodness for these hand signals, because I was able to say, first off, out of comms. I cannot communicate with you. And then at that point, the other 2 were able to spring into action. And the plan for that, the plan that they had then devised was, it's unsafe to continue without our third person having communications. So we aborted the mission and went back to the habitat safely.
Dude, that's so cool, man.
That brings up something I wanted to ask. The space helms were you running real oxygen into those, or was there just like an opening, or was it that level of realism? Or
at MDRS, the suits do not hold pressure. That actually is one thing that fidelity wise, high seas does better. For a lot of their missions on the Hawaii, they do actually have pressurized helmets. So that is one thing for MDRS you need to consciously commit to, but in actuality, you don't have that restraint.
So like that. So this fascinates me. So when you say consciously commit, so what about like you were just saying, like if you every step that when you commit, you have to consider that it could be a deadly move if you don't actually follow all the protocols. So like after the 2-week session was over, did you guys have did your team meet and have like a self-assessment over all the different times where something like that could have happened? Or like, did you guys kind of do like a self-audit for these things? Like because that would be cool to me. Well, on this day, like technically you forgot to lock your this or that, you got to be more conscientious of these things. Like how does that whole thing go? Like afterwards?
We covered these sorts of things on our daily debrief. So around sweet. 8 or 9 p.m. of every single day for the first 13 of 14 days, we were able to essentially sit down as a team and say, okay, so we recognize we're learning, but especially at first, it was like, we cannot let this happen again. Whether it be forgetting a second. Okay. We create some of the rules. Mars Desert Research Station, one of the best parts of MDRS, in my opinion, is that while they do have quite a bit of structure and they have your best interest in mind in terms of it being a really productive experience for you and an accurate experience, your team sets a lot of additional rules for itself. So as the commander on this team and the one who organized it from the get-go, I wanted to make sure my team experienced the most high fidelity experience they could possibly get. And so sure enough, even though we are required to go out with a radio communications, we learned very quickly that one just wasn't enough, that we were experiencing maybe every couple of EVAs, someone would lose their comms, and we had to make a decision there whether we should continue or not. And so someone made a great suggestion. What about bringing second communications? We have enough. And so sure enough, that saved us. We were able to do the rest of the EVAs without ever having to go back for reasons related to communications, just because someone was like, guys, what if we bring a second one?
Sweet, man. That's awesome.
What kind of radios were you guys using? Just like standard walkie-talkies, like FMRA, or?
These are very typical RF walkies, and they are purposely designed or purposely given to you with low to medium range, something on the order of 3 to 5 miles. The purpose of this is to simulate what maybe on Mars you could experience in terms of being able to communicate with the habitat. At some point, it's likely that you will want to go outside of range. And so, sure enough, the areas of interest at the research station were sometimes beyond 5 miles. And so we had to communicate with the habitat and also mention our position, say how far we were away, whether we could see them still. And at some point, for some of these farther out missions, farther out EVAs, we knew we were going to lose their communication, and we had to check. We had made our own system of being able to check in with them and make sure they were comfortable and that we were comfortable.
Wow. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this is kind of the third part here of our third annual podcast, right, if you will. And I would imagine this experience, the Antarctica, the first time we talked to you, you talked about learning Russian and why you were becoming a pilot and doing scuba and being a paramedic and doing all these things was with the purpose of pursuing, a career as an astronaut and wanting to go to Mars, and beyond, I'm sure. What's been going on with you in that process, with NASA, and what have you been, working on beyond, those things we just mentioned there?
Right. And it's really cool that like some of this has been cataloged with your own podcast. I think you guys have done a really good job of helping even me see what that looks like, sort of on an annual basis. This is something that not a lot of people get to keep track of. But yeah, essentially, this year, 2021, it has been a really important year for anyone who could apply to NASA for the first time as an astronaut applicant. And now I should preface by saying NASA does not purposely tell you how far you've gotten at any point. They only tell you when you've made it to the next round. To my awareness, I've been fortunate enough to be put into the highly qualified group. So what that means is, of the roughly 12,000 applicants back in March of 2020, I'm in the top 400. And I'm definitely at this point in pretty good company. You can imagine once you're in the top 400, a lot of people in that group start to look a lot like you. And we might have a cluster of physicians, a cluster of test pilots, people coming from military backgrounds, people coming from civilian backgrounds. Of course, you have all genders. You should still have all walks of life at this point. But as far as people in my specific category, which could be male, engineer, PhD, we're talking now maybe like 40 or 50 people, and so that's a very exciting. It's very exciting. I feel very fortunate that really, if I were to take the people that were being looked at in my specific group, we have a fourth grade classroom full of people, and that feels really, really special.
Dude, for record, I'm putting this out there, dude. I'm fucking proud of you, bro. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, you're kicking ass right now, dude. 40 or 50, dude.
And sick. Man, we're huge fans of yours and support you, in and out of the podcast. I'm always keeping an eye on you, and it's pretty amazing. And first of all, thank you for for that compliment. That's it's why we do this, is to kind of shine this light that we have together, out and share it with people. And you've been a really awesome part of that. And anytime someone's like, "Hey, what's your podcast about?" I'm like, "Here, check out Dylan Dickstein," because that always, no kidding. You're always somebody that I refer people to. But what what exactly is it like to be, you know, going through this while it's not exactly the most simple of times, you know, politically, socially, economically. Like there's a lot of crazy shit going on, and it's been going on. And just when we think it can't get any weirder, something else weird pops up. But you've still got to be like focused and pursuing this larger than yourself goal. How have you been able to do that?
Yeah, no, you're right. This is not by any means the easiest time for a lot of career paths, and that does not exclude prospective astronaut. Yeah, probably the biggest difficulty that I've experienced is flying. Essentially, while I'm training, you are with an instructor, and so naturally you have two people in very close proximity. And there's no opportunity for them to isolate. One person is training plenty of other people to learn how to fly, and one person is learning how to fly amid a bunch of other activities they have in their life. And not to mention that, or not only this, but there are certain regulations to try to keep the flight training going, but still try to maintain some level of added safety. And what that means is a lot of our student pilots, actually, and other pilots who are trained and have their licenses already, are wearing masks while they're flying. Now, this is still like a smart thing to do. Like I definitely believe in masks, and I think they've been proven to do quite a bit of good with people in close proximity. But you can imagine one of the important parts of flying is communication with air traffic control.
Well, and that affects safety, and that, you know, you can't accidentally drop a plane out of the sky onto somebody's minivan. You know, like there's bigger consequences there.
Right, and so one thing that, just now the difficulty of being a student pilot is not having that same sort of ability to focus on the task at hand. Flying, much like driving a manual car, is a two-handed activity. You have typically your left hand on either a joystick or a yoke to control the various orientation of the plane, its attitude, and then you typically have your other hand, often your right hand, used for throttle. And so you need to have both these hands active. And so the idea of fixing a mask up onto your nose is just one small thing that people have to consider, and people probably don't realize is happening right now. And not to even to mention, of course, the most obvious would be any sort of muffled communication. And so not that learning how to fly is impossible right now, but there are certainly added difficulties making sure you pronounce everything. You are so clear with air traffic control, making sure you've done an extra good job to make sure your PPE, your protection is situated in a way where you can just don't worry about it, that you are good to go and you can fly that plane. And so these are just some things that probably most people don't realize is happening right now. There are pilots that are their job is even harder now.
Yeah, and it's like on a list of jobs we don't need to make more stressful is commercial pilot.
Right.
Pretty wild.
Yeah. And then so beyond like sort of the confines of masking up or isolation, it's difficult to do any sort of international exploring, of course. I was originally, back in the beginning of 2020, in communication with Roscosmos, which is the Russian space agency, and there was actually an astronaut analog that I was in the running for out there in Moscow, and unfortunately that simulation had to be canceled. And just because it was a collaboration between NASA and Roscosmos, and it just became logistically really too difficult to get people from the U.S. over to Russia. And so there certainly are things going on right now that you have to be okay. You have to find other ways to get that experience. Perhaps the most safe one right now is scuba. You're already wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Right.
For your own air.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're breathing your own air. You're wearing a mask, and you're isolated. It's just you and the fish.
I'm gonna get myself one of those old timey, that
some metal suits.
The Cuba Gooding Jr. diving movie. I'm gonna get myself one of those rigs to just walk around in, and maybe that'll do it.
You'll definitely get some stares.
Yeah, for sure.
But you're scuba ready for sure.
Absolutely.
But yeah, scuba diving actually has been probably one of the better ways of training. And sure enough, I have been able to scuba dive during this period. I scuba dove back in Santa Catalina, which is an island just off the coast of California. Arguably the best scuba diving in California. A gorgeous Garibaldi fish. You have these different reefs around. It's and very crystal clear water.
Sweet, man.
That sounds great. Now, let me ask you this kind of broadly, and we got to be careful how we broach the subject in these uncircumcised times here. Would you say that these circumstances are affecting the way science is being done in a way that maybe the everyman, the everywoman are just kind of not thinking about because we're all doing our thing?
So coming from the perspective of someone who is finishing up their PhD, I'm fortunate to be in the last few months of my PhD, and that's how the triple D came about. Dr. Dylan Dickstein. I look forward to adding that final D. Thank you. One of the things that we become the best at is being able to figure out fact versus fiction. And it's something that I would say many people with my degree get really good at by force. You have to be able to figure out when something is factual versus just unsupported. And so there's a whole area of the internet that a lot of people are probably not aware of. And no, I'm not talking about the dark web. I'm talking about something called Google Scholar. Essentially, if you Google Scholar, there is a sub-portion of Google which has only peer-reviewed manuscripts. Essentially, you have information that has only been verified by people who know that stuff. And it will not be published if it wasn't. And so now there isn't every single topic in this part of the internet, but if you have a question about whether something could be accurate or not, go to Google Scholar, find a few different articles, read them to the best of your ability. A lot of them are really technical. That's the problem. Although they're really technical and difficult to understand by most people. But if you can take away 10% of some of these articles, you will see the truth to the best of science's knowledge. And it's amazing how few people take the time, even if they're aware of Google Scholar or anything like it, some sort of peer-reviewed journals. Very few people are willing to take the time to actually decipher whether something is real or not. And it's not, it shouldn't be the requisite for someone to be able to just spout information if they've only seen peer-reviewed work. Of course, that in my opinion, that's the preference. I would never expect everyone to go back to Google Scholar, check something, and then share it with a friend. But it is amazing sometimes how free people will share information because it seems sensational, because it seems fantastical, and it's so amazing. I got to share it. But so often it needs to be checked. It needs someone to say, what was the source? Can you reference that? Can you point me to where you found that? And without all those things, I don't think people are not equipped with the power of language.
Money.
Well said.
That's it.
And I'll tell you what, and again, not going to name any specific things, but there's a couple stories, you use the word sensation, sensationalize, and something that's just, sometimes it seems like willfully misguiding or misdirecting or intentionally omitting a fact, where sometimes, like, if you're like myself and you really dig into things, you're like, well, wait a minute, like, come on, I found this, like you're saying, like, there's resources you can go to, and it's like, you tell me you didn't also check the Mayo Clinic website, or, you know what I mean, or like the WHO website, like, there's certain things that might surprise you that you take a look at it a second time, you're like, huh, how about that? That's a little weird. And it's hard to even direct people, because the people, I think, make things so personal, the way the world's gone.
I feel like you'll often find, like, DYOR, do your own research. Now that it does make a pretty big assumption. It assumes that someone can properly do their own research, right? It assumes that person can go, okay, I know what to look for, and I know how to figure out whether that's true or not. The problem is most people don't know that process.
Right.
People are not trained in school sufficiently
for critical thinking,
for the real world. Yeah, to be able to question every little thing, and try to understand what that source is, and where that source is supported by someone who knows that area. And I tell you, Google Scholar, I'm a huge fan. It's really a part of the web that most people don't know about. And if you ever have someone, to the audience here, if anyone here is like, cannot figure out if something's true or not, take a little time with Google Scholar, and you will be illuminated.
Great advice.
I'm diving into Google Scholar right after we get off this pod. I promise.
Daryl's firing it up.
I'm firing it up.
You're in the pool. You're highly well. Listen, we already knew you were highly qualified, but you're officially highly qualified, which is something you can, at the very least, you could put on your resume for the rest of your life. Hey, I am highly qualified. It's like a status there. What? I mean, you still want to go to Mars, right? Like, you're still out taking the ship up, huh? You're still into that?
If I am fortunate enough to be offered to ride on the first flight to Mars, because I would be a productive member of that crew, I'm going. I would gladly participate. And this past year has been very exciting for the launch vehicle side of things. SpaceX has continued to do an incredible job getting ready for our first crewed voyage to Mars. Starship is the vehicle, and it likely we first used and tested around the moon. But it is fully prepared. It's designed with the intention that it will be used to go to Mars. And I feel pretty honored that the predecessor to this vehicle is Crew Dragon, and that's the vehicle that has had a lot of activity with various astronauts this year. We had Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken. I believe that would have been the middle of last year, but we had Crew Dragon being crewed for the first time, and since then, just earlier this week or last week, we had the first all civilian Crew Dragon go. The first time only a purely civilian crew has gone to space, and these were not trained professionals. There were 4 individuals that went to space, to low Earth orbit, after just a few months of training and one big donor.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up, and you mentioned earlier, like, this podcast has been a timeline of sorts for you, and it's also been a timeline kind of for the quick evolution of commercial spaceflight, and it's it's kind of cool. I told you before, my dad has a big interest in space, and I've always been interested in it and followed it. And I remember vividly, when the Mars rover landed in 1996, it was a big deal, and seeing the little pictures come back and the space shuttle launches and landings and all that stuff to now, where I remember a couple years ago when I first heard like these private companies are going to go to space, like, all right, we'll see how this goes. And then now it's like every week somebody's launching something. And I wanted to ask you, like, the Galactic, Virgin Galactic, is that space? Is that not space? Clarify for us here, the Everyman and the Everywoman, what was significant about what Richard Branson and company did there?
Yes. And I should give a little more context to the audience. I do come from the bias that I did used to work at Virgin Galactic. This is one of the companies that I've been at, along with SpaceX and United Launch Alliance and Aerospace Corporation. I've never worked at Blue Origin, so this is the one. Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic are the two companies that are sort of they're competing to have people experience a suborbital flight. And Virgin Galactic's process, as we've seen, is a space plane that has a hybrid engine, a hybrid motor on the back, and it turns on, and they're able to pitch up and experience this parabolic arc, where the top roughly minute and a half, 2 minutes of that is weightless. Blue Origin, we've seen it's more of a launch vehicle type. You're a capsule on top of a launch vehicle, and you are rocketed up and kind of similarly make this parabolic arc that's also suborbital. So the two go, they achieve certain similar things. They're both having you be weightless for sure. That's the commonality. The difference is certainly the method. One's a space plane, one's more of a rocket with a capsule, but the altitudes are pretty different. Now, with Virgin Galactic, you go to a little bit past 80 kilometers. And with Blue Origin, you're going a little bit past 100 kilometers. So in terms of your difference, you're going high versus like a little bit higher, right? Like you're both are incredibly high. If you're flying a plane, you are at cruising altitude at 35,000 feet, 7 miles, maybe 12 kilometers, 13 kilometers. So if we're talking 80 versus 100 kilometers, this is higher than just about anyone you've ever met and talked to has gone. So from that perspective, they're both really accomplishing incredible things. And at those altitudes, it's black outside. There's not enough atmosphere for it to be blue. And you definitely get that feeling of being in space. Now, if you want to look at a textbook, the definition, one definition of space is something called the Kármán line. The Kármán line starts at 100 kilometers. And notice that sounds a little bit arbitrary, right? It's just kind of around 100. So there's nothing that special about 100 exactly, right? Why not 99? But it is a number that's been in textbooks for a long time, that space begins at the Kármán line. The Kármán line is at 100 kilometers. Now, Virgin Galactic would love to go to 100 kilometers. If they could, they would. The problem is the actual space plane and the motor on the back make it very difficult for them to surpass 100 kilometers. Blue Origin can get to 100 kilometers with less difficulty. They can do it regularly. So, no, Virgin Galactic cannot get to the Kármán line. From the original definition, Virgin Galactic cannot go to space, and Blue Origin can. However, there are other definitions for where space begins, and there are some non-civilian definitions that say that space actually begins at 80 kilometers. So it's one of those things where it depends who you ask. You can debate it all day. In my opinion, both companies are having you experience weightlessness. Both companies are having you experience the blackness of space, multiple G's of acceleration. You are experiencing a rocket engine on both. So I would say both products are very, very similar. And because the price points are very similar, I think you'd be you'd have to have a very particular preference to really want one or the other. But I would say both are providing a space experience product.
Now, the way you describe it, I mean, it sounds like those flights you can get, those 0G experience flights in Vegas. You can rent a 747 for like $1,100, and they take you like up and down like a snake, and you get a little bit of weightlessness. Now, because if I'm doing the risk reward analysis, and I'm thinking like, well, I'm not really going to space, but my risk of a horrible death is about a lot higher. I don't even know what the exact number is. I mean, do you think people are really gonna do this? Like, enough people are gonna do that casually that will take that risk to just sort of go to space?
I should try to clarify what that risk really looks like too. The chances of there being something catastrophic is less than 1%, and maybe even like an order of magnitude less than 1%, such that at the current amount of safety and practice that Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin have, far and away, the likeliness is you will have a safe flight and you'll be able to focus on an enjoyment. And even if there were to be some sort of problem, there are quite a few contingencies in place now after a lot of reworking for the Virgin Galactic spaceship, as well as the New Shepard with Blue Origin. These are pretty safe vehicles. They really are. Mm-hmm. And I'd say you were right though that the product that you can experience with these two companies is sort of a next level. It's quite a step up, but it's a next level in an analogous way to the 0G flights. They're sort of a way to experience what it's like to be an astronaut without necessarily being selected into NASA or some other astronaut organization.
Well, anytime you get a flight suit, I mean, you got my attention.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I guess the thing that strikes me as I don't know, I don't want to say confused by it, but I get that there are people that are going to want to do that, and it's going to, like, the money from that, you need a tourism aspect of it. But I feel like the way people are, just like look at something like VR, all right? And it didn't take long. It's like, wow, have you seen the VR headsets? Yeah, man, it's great. Okay. And then it was all porn, like, it's like at a certain point, people will be like, yeah, I went up to space. Okay, now what? Like I want to play basketball up there. I want to, so like maybe that's what gets us to that next level, is like giving people, like a taste of it, and then it'll just inspire a new generation to do more, kind of the way that, the space program did in the 60s and 70s. I mean, what do you think about that? Is that where we're headed, you think?
Yeah, I would say on one hand, we need these things. We need more and more people to experience what space could be like, or what is like. This does inspire other entrepreneurs and other billionaires to try to invest in space. Like this, definitely, Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos are really creating an environment that is very healthy for entrepreneurs. As far as their individual businesses, it does remain to be seen whether it becomes this prolific and growing angle of their companies, or if it's more of a fad. And so you're right to kind of question that, like, what is next? Are just thousands of people waiting to do this, spend $500,000 for 5 minutes in space? Maybe, but of course the exclusivity is largely because of the cost, and while there sure maybe are millions of people that do have $500,000 in their bank account, what percentage of those are really have this itch to see space for a few minutes? I think the product, though, I will say that SpaceX is putting out, and the product we were able to use for the first time this past week with the Inspiration 4 mission, where you have essentially a billionaire sponsoring the mission, paying for the mission and giving away the additional flights, the additional seats. So we had Jared Isaacman, I believe is his name, and he bought the flight and essentially gave away the additional 3 seats to worthy people, people who were not going to pay for the flight themselves. They couldn't afford it, but they were able to add something to the mission, add some motivation. And he made the flight about donating to St. Jude's Hospital.
That's amazing.
And so, yeah, it became an incredibly inspiring experience for anyone just to watch or to read in the news. And the actual experience for the participants, 3 days in low Earth orbit, almost twice the altitude of the International Space Station. It's much more expensive.
That sounds like space to me.
Yeah.
That's space. These people are in space, absolutely, and they're orbiting just in just the same way that anyone on the ISS would be orbiting. You get to see something like 13 sunsets and sunrises every day, once every 93 minutes or so, and they were doing this for days, and they splashed down in the ocean under a parachute. That is an even rarer experience because of the exclusivity with cost, but that is a product that will, if that scales, that's a product that will really, really inspire lots of people.
Now I know you're not a lawyer, so preface it with that. But you are a pilot and prospective astronaut. How would you compare what they're doing to, getting on a flight from Philly to LA? Like as far as like you can expect an issue.
You're asking about the risk?
Yeah, like just put it in perspective.
Yeah, flying at the local airport or some international airport is one of the safest things you could do in terms of travel. Orders of magnitude safer than driving your car.
Oh, without a doubt. It's got to be ridiculous. Yeah. Trains, too, I'm sure.
Of course, if there's a bad accident in a plane, your chances of survival are much lower than a bad accident in a car. So when there's a catastrophe, they're worse in planes. A similar thing can be said for the future of these kind of vehicles. They have incredibly high safety because of their contingencies. They're designed really well, and a lot of the engineers have thought about all sorts of problems, and you have many ways of recovering. But in the case of a catastrophic problem, the result becomes, pretty depressing. Maybe in a similar way, that's going to be part of the draw for a little while. You have people who want that thrill, and some people,
the other Richard Branson billionaires of the world.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Those guys, it's like, yeah, he does like have a good time.
Yeah, and while no one wants to brag about surviving anything, that there's an element of excitement there if there's uncertainty.
Yeah. It's like, look what I did. Oh, you went on safari? Yeah, well, I spent 3 days in orbit.
Right. That's right.
It's a good way to one up your neighbor. That's wild, man. So what do you, I ask you this every time you've been on the podcast, how far away are we, from going to Mars? What do you think has changed, in the last year since we last saw you? And, anything that you've seen the last year really made you go, I think we're headed that way? Space or not?
I will say, like, I've been fortunate enough to have a decent perspective, especially for someone that really hasn't even entered the workforce yet, right? Like I'm still a student in a way, finishing up my PhD, but because I have had an opportunity to work for such places as SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, and a few others, Aerospace Corporation, United Launch Alliance, having worked at the launch pads at Cape Canaveral, having been at SpaceX headquarters for a summer, I understand what it means to innovate quickly, and I've seen how fast some of these up and coming space companies can move. And 2034 was, I believe, the year that I gave last time, saying first boost on Mars, and I'm sticking with it. I think this last year has been a continuation of that level of progress, and 2034 might still feel like kind of a ways off, but I wouldn't push that date back even a year. Like I think we will see within 13 years from now the first people step foot on Mars, and it might be not so glamorous. Maybe the experience is primarily spending time on the actual spacecraft itself, and then occasionally, maybe once a month, going outside and gathering some rocks. It'll be a longer duration version, perhaps, to what we experienced on the moon. The going to the moon was incredible, but really, that's what you remember. You don't like when you ask someone, what did they do on the moon? Most people would probably go, I would presume they gathered some rocks, but it doesn't really matter, like that's not what it was all about. The whole point of Apollo was to get to the moon. And so the odd thing there, though, is with the moon, you can go there and come right back because you're still, the distance from the moon to Earth remains relatively constant. The problem with Mars is every day the distance changes because it's an elliptical orbit. And so Mars and Earth only align roughly every 2 years. So the problem is once you go there, the amount of time from the departure from Earth and then arrival back at Earth has to be around 2 years for the fuel to be efficient. So once you've stepped foot on Mars, you're there potentially for 6 months. And figuring out what to do with that time continues to be a big question mark. And whether people can survive that is really what remains to be figured out. We have the technology to get there. We might have the technology to come back, but we definitely still need to work on the technology to stay.
Well, I would think you would need to that's why the vertical takeoff and landing is so important with
Definitely.
SpaceX right now, because you'd have to take whatever resources you're going to need to build a launch pad, or not need one, whatever it may be. And then all your fuel that you'll need to survive, but then also the fuel to get out. Like you can't, it's almost like, I remember reading at some point an article about two craft having to go just to make it practical. And then one stays, kind of in orbit, and then the other is back and forth. And
It's totally true. Very likely what will end up happening is either multiple vehicles will be launched simultaneously, or just prior you'll have a vehicle launched with the intention for that to be used for a fueling facility on Mars or an energy facility. And so once that sort of infrastructure at least exists on Mars, then it'll at least make the return flight more plausible.
You know what, Dylan? I got to ask a question. Now, again, I'm always humbled by just you giving your expertise in this area to the podcast and to others, other Everymen and Everywomen, like, even me and Brother Jay, like, that don't really know about this. But we talk about getting there. We talk about the technology, that, having to negotiate a stay and then return. But what about like the voyage there? Like, what contingencies are there? Like debris, other, like things that could, impede the process of the vehicles to get there. But is that scientifically accounted for as well? Like, how do you guys answer things that might happen on the way there? Like, that's always kind of been the thing for me. Like,
yeah, no, you bet. And it's a long voyage too. It can be 6 months, 8 months. the from the spacecraft standpoint, the two most difficult parts of flight are takeoff and landing. And so likely from Earth, you are taking off, having to go through atmosphere, and you have a lot of dynamic pressure that's trying to break apart your vehicle. If you can handle that, congratulations. You've made it up. You've checked one major box. The actual trip after Earth's atmosphere into Mars' atmosphere is cake. You're coasting the whole way. Now, once you try to re-enter Mars' atmosphere, you have the same problem again. You're trying to go through all these particles that are trying to break apart your vehicle, and it gets so hot. It gets incredibly hot. And that's actually where we've seen some of these SpaceX Starship belly flop maneuvers. The whole reason why you see it come down on its face or on its side like this is because that's in preparation for Mars. That's the way to enter Mars the coolest and have essentially the least amount of heating on your surface. And so that's why it does the belly flop. It's never been to my knowledge.
Heat out, right?
Yeah, exactly. To spread out the heat. And so you don't have this like bottom side that with the engine bells. Yeah, it melts.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, from the human standpoint, those parts of flight are some of the easiest because they don't last very long. We're talking about like 5 minutes to get out, 8 minutes to return. Like, you could maybe finish, this podcast in the amount of time that you'd have any sort of accelerations on the trip to Mars. But for humans, of course, waiting around for the 6 to 8 months to pass is the hard part. So it's kind of funny. The vehicle, the part that's inhuman, is struggling while you're fine, and vice versa.
That's the other thing too. I got to say is, and we talked about it the last time you were on, and you were telling us about your voice and stay in Antarctica. The storytelling, man, like you got to do something with that, man, because you're pretty good, man. You're dead ass good. I gotta say it. I'm here at NFL Films, and we got the best, sports production minds in the world telling these stories for our glorious game of football. But damn it, you can do it for space, man. I'm telling you can do it.
You're kind, Daryl. You're too kind.
It's awesome, man.
Yeah, you really are. Let me address the NASA, high-level NASA government employees right now that are monitoring this here podcast. You got yourself a man who is an excellent communicator of why space is important and how to make you excited about it. And,
Thanks, Justin.
There's a lot of people out there that are great communicators for things, and I think one that I can think of is like Anthony Bourdain, rest in peace. And
yeah, rest in peace.
When you watch, I don't know anyone who enjoys storytelling that doesn't want that. You don't have to love cooking or travel or anything, but that man had a special gift for communicating why things were special, And I remember seeing a perfect example is I never got New Orleans, and I saw, one of his episodes on it one time and him explaining it. And then eventually when I went to New Orleans, I was like, we had the food and we experienced the culture. You're like, okay, now I understand. I understand what he was communicating here, and that's kind of how I feel about what you're doing with space flight. Not only that, but as an example for others, my fiance and I, we're getting ready, less than a month, by the time this actually 30 days from today, this podcast coming out. So we're getting married, and we were talking about kind of pushing ourselves in the next year to really experience new things and do new things. And I'm kind of like getting dinner ready, and Sam goes, I was listening back to the episode you did with Dylan Dickstein, and he said, your life and your experiences are like a bubble, and every time you push the bubble, you get a new experience, but now you're that much further out. And she was saying how that spoke to her. And then I thought about it again, and I hadn't thought about it in a while. And I was like, man, that's like, I'm glad it was like the perfect little thing I needed to hear and she needed to hear at that time. And that's, that's kind of what we're we're missing from certain institutions. And you mentioned earlier, like the Google Scholar thing and knowing who to listen to. And, you know, you're like that. So, you know, it's like Daryl said, man, we love connecting with you and hearing you explain this stuff. Cause it's just, you've got a special, I think of all the things you do, man, I think that's your thing.
It's your superpower, bro. Triple D is the beacon.
Yeah.
Put it down. Put it down.
I mean, I don't know.
Yes.
I'm not a scuba instructor, but I'm sure you're great at that too. So, you know, as we wind down here, what are you doing next? What's next for Dylan Dickstein? Another question I ask you every time I see you.
Yeah, this next step for me is probably going to be one of the more mundane, but also one of the most important for me. I'm at the point of my PhD where that is the point. I'm in the final roughly 4 months of my PhD, and what that means is I'm wrapping up my manuscripts. Essentially, anything that I am trying to publish is in the process of being reviewed and finalized. So I was fortunate enough about a year ago to have my first manuscript accepted and published in the Journal of Applied Physics. And in fact, I was kind of blown away. I ended up becoming the cover of the Journal of Applied Physics for a month. That was very nice. Yeah, thank you. And then, and just last week, I had my second paper accepted, and about in that same week, I actually submitted my third paper. So and then I'm in the process of finishing my fourth and final. So that process is pretty intensive. You can imagine it's trying to make sure that you are fully aware with the topics that you are trying to study, and that you are pushing the envelope in a way that no one else has. It will not be accepted. It will not be published if it just repeats what someone else has done. For a PhD, you have to do something new. And I love aerospace engineering, and it's very exciting because it is far from finished, you know, like, and I get to have a small part from the academic side currently in pushing it a little bit forward. So that definitely takes the majority of my attention for the next few months, getting those papers finished, organizing into a dissertation, presenting that dissertation in front of experts in the field, my own advisor and boss, as well as a few other of their colleagues at UCLA. And then we'll see what kind of comes next. The following step is an incredibly large question mark, but a very exciting one. And whether that means I get to be employed immediately, but by NASA in some astronaut capacity, or whether for at least for a few more years, I continue to support it on the ground and design the vehicles that will help other astronauts get there. Either way, I'm a happy guy, and I love doing this. I love studying aerospace and being part of it.
That's
hell yeah, man.
That's awesome, man. Well, we all here in the Cosmic Canoe, we know where you're headed, brother. No doubt about it. Now, what is the best place for the Everyman and the Everywoman to keep up with you if they're just getting a taste of the old Triple D here? What's the best way to keep up with you, brother?
Instagram at Dylan Dickstein. Just my name is perfect, and I also have a YouTube channel as well, Dylan Dickstein. And stay tuned on there for more Mars as a Research Station content. Essentially, you get to see what I'm like in isolation.
Sick.
I definitely want to get a little bit more of the Mars experience up on YouTube. Dylan, anything you want the Everyman and the Everywoman to hear before we sign off?
I want them to try to ponder for themselves whether they could see themselves on any of those space flights, and whether the idea of just touching space for a few minutes is enough for you, or if you'd want to spend a few days up there, or if you'd want to spend some time actually walking around on Mars for 8 months. at some point, that those kind of questions will be the ones people are asked. Not like, do you want to go to space, but really, how long do you want to spend there? To what extent do you want to be there and participate? Because these things we've seen in the last year with more and more common people. These are special people and talented people, but really these are average people getting the opportunity to make their mark in space. And I think if everyone here can ask themselves what that looks like for them, I think they might have a different perspective.
You're making me think myself. I'll tell you what.
Mic drop.
I'll tell you what. That's the trailer right there. Dylan Dickstein, the Everyman podcast. Dylan, thank you as always, man. We'll catch you soon.
You bet.
Yeah.